States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Well, welcome everyone. Belated Happy New Year, since our first regular meeting was canceled. Just want to wish everyone a Happy New Year. Two announcements. First is a public hearing to consider a local law amending Chapter 217, Water of the Irvington Code to clarify certain provisions. That's scheduled for February 5th, 2018 at 7 p.m. in Village Hall. Did you want to, this is kind of, I think it is what it says. It's just kind of...
Yeah, I'll just explain the two provisions. One would be that it makes it clear that in section 217.13 that maintenance of the service line from the village water maintenance point of view is the responsibility of the owner. And it's always been the policy and practice of the village, but this just clarifies it in the law. And then the other one clarifies when leaks have to be repaired. The language is a little garbled in it. So now it says that leaks that developed have to be repaired promptly by the owner. But if they're not repaired within 2 days after the village notifies them, the village can shut off the service. The notification provision doesn't have to be. The notification provision was on for the point. It's just clarifying.
Yeah, I don't feel like they could let it leak forever, and then they had 2 days until it's and the second is a public hearing to consider a local law amending Chapter 9 of the Village Code, Board of Architectural Review. I don't know if you wanted this. It's also for February 5th, 2018.
Yeah, this is just very, also very brief. The board is going to consider tonight the local landmarks law, and under that, which I'm sure I'll be explaining later, but under the local landmarks law, the ARB has to review any removal or alteration of a local landmark, and that's in a proposed chapter on local landmarks. This would just amend the ARB chapter of the code, which sets out the powers of the ARB and give them the power to do that. So it's really a technical amendment.
So I guess first I'll make a motion for the public hearing to consider local law amending Chapter 215 Water of the Irvington Code to clarify certain provisions on February 5th, 2018 at 7 p.m. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
And the second is for public hearing to consider local law amending Chapter 9 of the Village Code, Board of Architectural Review, also for February 5th, 2018 at 7 p.m. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Correspondence, Jill, do you want me to read it, or do you want to?
I'd love to read it, but I have a comment after, so if you want me to go second,
Okay, sure. I'll start this first one. Is from Kate Taylor. Dear Mayor Smith, Board of Trustees, we appreciate your recent note regarding the tax bill, especially your ending line. We are deeply distressed by the disproportionate burden of this federal action on village residents and accept the profound responsibility to do all we can to mitigate the effects as we go through the budgeting process. We own a home in the Irvington's downtown and experience a 70% increase in property taxes with the reassessment. With federal tax changes, we are deeply concerned about our ability to stay in Irvington. We've been holding on a copy of the Hudson Independent from October 2017. There are 2 articles on one page, one interviewing Tarrytown's mayor and the other our own mayor, Brian Smith. There's a link. We appreciate very much Mayor Smith and trustees focus on tough discussions about merging school, police, and public works. We are very much in favor of these explorations. I think they are going to be the key to enabling the middle class to own and live in Irvington. Otherwise, the downtown will fully change to multifamily rentals and upper class. It is already going in that direction. We were struck by Mayor Fixell's comment, quote, "We don't have a tremendous amount of control over our revenues and spending. We have a limited number of tools," Fixell explained. "We operate under a tax system that leads to significant commercial assessment and tax revenue reductions despite strength in the local economy. We're always looking to maintain services and make improvements at the same time to keep taxes as low as possible." And that comment made me question Mayor Smith's focus on attracting and keeping businesses that will help shore up the tax base while not threatening the essential character of the village. We would love to have commercial businesses shore up the tax base, but an emphasis on that tactic as a savior to our residential tax burden seems not quite warranted given Tarrytown's experience that even with the strong local economy, the commercial sector is not making a difference in the residential property tax burden. It is under consideration to advocate to try to change the tax system, reducing commercial assessments. Why create more traffic in town with breweries and businesses if those businesses will not substantially offset residential tax burdens? With a coalition of villages working together to try to address the commercial assessment rate be viable. Working together with peer governments is something Mayor Smith has emphasized in his interview. A big thanks for all your significant work helping Irvington. Sincerely, Catherine Taylor and Michael Merman, 26 South Ecker Street. A couple of quick comments. I think, I can't speak for Mayor Fixell in Tarrytown, but we think that a lot of what he was talking to were co-ops that often file for tax abatements And, I think that they're considered commercial properties, and we see that here, that, often they're the biggest certiorari's we see in Irvington. And, I think I stand by the fact that I think that we need a strong commercial base here to offset some of the residential. Our biggest taxpayer is Bridge Street. And we think having a mix not only is good for the tax base, but it's also just good for the village in general to have restaurants and things like that in town. So, Larry, I think you looked at it some too, but.
Yeah, no, it's same basic theme that you echoed. I think it, by saying that Tarrytown's having an issue with commercial property tax reductions doesn't mean that there should be no commercial properties here in Irvington. You know what I mean? Like, it's kind of taking it to the extreme. So it's really about, I think your comments were more about creating a mix and a better mix and not being so reliant on one particular sector.
Right.
So that's really what it was about.
Yeah, I do think that, one of the biggest criticisms of the reassessment was the treatment of, commercial properties. And Supervisor Feiner has said when they look to do it again in 5 years, he's going to look at that more carefully this time. Last time, I think there was a quick vote, like on an off night or something like that, and there was some conspiracy theories about that. But he has committed to kind of looking at that again. So Cheryl, we can just go into public comment if you want. We can just kind of combine the two.
Thank you.
Sure.
I was hoping for. So my letter, I'll read first. It's concerning the Hudson Loft. Dear Mayor Smith and village trustees, and let me just say Cheryl Brandline, 85 South Buckhead Street. Dear Mayor Smith and village trustees, when a party takes place at the new Hudson Loft party space on the waterfront, the music is so loud that our house literally shakes. Our children cannot sleep and have resorted to keeping earmuffs by their beds for when the loft is having a party, which was the case the night that I wrote this letter. The village code states in section 148-4B, the following acts among others are declared to be loud, disturbing, and unnecessary noises in violation of this chapter, and the subsection I believe to apply is subsection 7, which refers to noise generated by a business that impacts its neighbors, specifically a business in the waterfront zone or in a mixed residential business zone cannot create noise that disturbs the peace, quiet, and comfort of the neighboring inhabitants between the hours of 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. We and our neighbors have had to call the police on numerous occasions to report noise complaints against the Hudson Loft. We are not asking that it be shut down or required to soundproof the building. We simply request the Hudson Loft be asked to turn down the volume in accordance with the village code so that we can go back to enjoying our right to peace and quiet in our residential neighborhood. So my comment, briefly, is that this adds insult to injury for us, the residents of South Buckhead Street, who are already opposing Bill Thompson on another matter. When we call the police, and I have and my neighbors have on numerous occasions, they refer us to the code section regarding personal radios and phonographs. This is not my neighbor's radio is too loud. This is a business in the waterfront district disturbing the peace and quiet of the neighbors. I don't understand why the police keep citing us to the radio code, but perhaps the village attorney or someone else can talk with the police chief and educate the police department about it. It seems to us, and I don't know how else to say this, that there's not a level playing field here. When I open the paper and I see this thank you for the fall benefit in honor of one of the trustees, and the number one contributor is Bill Thompson, and the number two, Toby Schmidt, the owners of the Hudson Loft. Bill Thompson has a petition pending before the Board of Trustees. How is this not a conflict of interest, or at least the appearance of one, we deserve to feel protected and represented. We don't feel there's a level playing field. And we ask that you please review the ethics code. I have the committee ethics code, which talks about gifts. And you're not allowed as a committee member, and I would think the standard would be higher for the Board of Trustees, to accept any gift from any person or company who currently has or is considering a business dealing with the village. Business dealing means any contract, service, or work for the village, as well as applying for or requesting any approval, license, permit, or other privilege from the village. So I came here tonight, and I have other neighbors because of a noise complaint, but I hope we can see it in the broader context of just what is going on here and why are we protecting Bill Thompson so vehemently. Thank you.
Well, on the first point, on the noise, I asked Larry to look into it, and the police are citing that one, because we actually had asked them first, what they did when they responded, and they actually cited the same thing. I've asked, Larry and I met about today, and we're going to ask Mary Ann to look at it and see which applies. It almost seems like there's at least the way the police read it, it seemed like both apply, which makes it confusing, so.
I have it here, if I can just,
I'm nowhere to find it.
thank you.
We'll get you the answer.
If you could look at the one they're citing, which is 148B2, is about a person or persons listening to their radio too loud. That's not what this is. And the Hudson Loft, the back of the party space, it projects right into our homes and literally makes our houses shake. And I've had the police at my house, my kids can't sleep. This is absurd. Thank you.
I'm Pat Ryan, and I'm president of the Irvington Historical Society. And that was, of course, our benefit that you were referring to. Let me just say that our thank you to Bill Thompson and Toby Schmidt were simply for whatever assistance they gave us in setting up the event. There was no monetary contribution.
Was there an in-kind contribution?
There was no in-kind contribution. In fact, we paid the fee that anyone would pay, and it really disturbs me to hear that implication.
You know what? I'm sorry to make that implication, but that's what it feels like when you've been fighting Bill Thompson for 8 years.
I know, but I think that in a situation like that, there is a way to contact someone and say, I saw this, it concerns me, I'd like to ask you that. Believe me, we sustain ourselves in this village. We work very hard to maintain what we do, and we have received nothing from Bill Thompson. So
Okay, that makes me feel better. Thank you.
Any other public comment?
I just want a point of clarification, if I could.
Sure.
I mean, Irvington Historical Society is not a village organization, and so what they do seems to me to be outside the realm of the village ethics law in terms of how committees and boards operate. So I just don't know if I'm misunderstanding this or not. So at some point I'd like to have Mary Ann talk about that, if you can. I mean, am I misunderstanding it's a private affair, effectively?
I think you're right.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. Kevin Gallagher, 77 South Buckout. Just so that Cheryl is not the only one making a complaint, just so you know who I am, I've been a village firefighter for 22 years, NYPD detective. I just passed my 35th year with the NYPD. I know what a cop does day to day, and it bothers the hell out of me to have to call these guys for some nonsense of somebody wants to play the music too loud. The music is disturbing. It comes straight across, right into our windows. It's like a a toothache. It's a thump, 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 thump. You can't sleep. You can turn the TV up as loud as you want, it still comes through. I've read, like Charles, I've read a couple of village codes, I've talked to the cops. One cop told me 11 o'clock, one guy told me 12 o'clock. Well, okay, if it's 11 o'clock, at 11:05, that music's still going. Yeah, it bothers me to do this, but I'm gonna call these guys every time. And I know a couple times they've come to the front on Astor Street. That's not where the music is going. It's coming out to South Buckhead. And then I've had another guy come by and he stopped and I told him, and he stood outside his car and he says, oh yeah, wow, you can feel it, literally feel it coming right through. My daughter's up on the top floor and she tells me, she says, I can understand the words to the music. And I mean, there's no reason for it. I know they had an event, what was it, last Friday? There was no music, and it's fine. No big deal, but it is so annoying and so irritating that, I get up at 4:30 to go to work in the morning, and I can't be listening to music at 11:30, 12 o'clock, and bothering these guys. They have better things to do.
I mean, it also seems to me like, common sense-wise, they wouldn't need it that loud inside. I mean, why would you want it that loud anyway?
We talk about that all the time. Say, if it's that loud for us,
Yeah.
across the street and inside the house,
Imagine being
these
in there,
people walking
with
out
the
of the building,
speakers facing your
I mean,
face. Yes, I mean, I'd be happy to, assuming that, once we have all the, the definitive law. I mean, to me, it's not even a law thing, it's a good neighbor thing, is to keep it down.
Yeah.
So I'd be happy to personally reach out to the loft and to say, hey, who's really enjoying not being able to talk to each other at the loft? So,
So no, I appreciate it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
any other public comment? Otherwise, we'll move on to the consent agenda. Any questions or comments on this?
No.
Seems pretty straightforward. I'll make a motion to approve the consent agenda. If I can get a second. All in favor? Now I will open the public hearing to consider local landmarks law. If I can get a second.
Second.
All in favor?
So you want me to go through the
Please,
law?
that'd be great.
I'll just go through the really operative provisions. There's a findings and purpose section and the definitional section, but the heart of it starts at section 144.3, when it says the Board of Trustees is authorized to designate sites, buildings, structures, markers, or other objects as local landmarks pursuant to the criteria and the procedures in this section. The Board of Trustees can act on its own or in response to a request from any village property owner, resident, or organization. And the procedure is that any request for local landmark designation has to be in writing, and there has to be a statement of how the object or building, whatever, satisfies the applicable criteria, which I'll get to later. Village gets the request and it sends a copy of it to the owner of the property that the site, the mark or whatever is located. Along with the request, the property owner advised the village within 30 days of its consent or refusal to consent to consideration. The first step is the property owner learns about it, but got 30 days to consent or not. If the property owner consents, the public hearing is set up. If the property owner doesn't consent, it's not. And if the property owner fails to respond within the 30 days, the failure to respond is deemed to be an objection to the designation and no public hearing will happen. So you can't have anything on your property designated a local landmark unless you affirmatively agree to it or request it. And then the procedure for notice, and then the testimony at the public hearing. And then if the board decides that it meets the qualifications, it'll pass a resolution and state the reasons. And then just as a belts and suspenders. And also, it's possible that the property owner could say, yeah, I consent, and then in the course of the hearing learn some stuff and they change their mind. It provides that the board can't designate a site as a local landmark if the owner of the property objects. If they object to the designation, that's the end of it, even if it happens later in the process. There's also a provision for voluntary designation. If somebody owns a site or a marker that they want designated, they can request the board to do it, and it's up to that person whether they want a public hearing on it or not. There doesn't need to be a public hearing, they can have a public hearing if they want. And then these are the criteria for a local landmark designation. It would have to have one or more of the following characteristics. Be associated with persons or events of historic significance to the village, region, state, or nation. Second, be illustrative of historic growth and development of the village, region, state, or nation. Third, embody distinctive characteristics of a type of period or method of construction or design style, or be representative of the work of a master, or possess unique architectural and artistic qualities. If it's included on the National Register of Historic Places, the New York Register, or the Westchester County Inventory of Historic Places, or it's yielded, or may be likely to yield information important to prehistory or history. And there's a moratorium provision that whenever the Board of Trustees has scheduled a public hearing on the local landmark designation for a period of 90 days, the site, building, structure, mark, or object can't be demolished. That's not really a big deal because the person's already consented to the board considering the designation. And then there's a provision that the decision would follow the same process. And then the effect of the local landmark designation. So, in addition to any other requirements in the zoning code, because some of these might be buildings that would require, site plan approval, building permits and stuff, but no place designated as a local landmark can be demolished or exteriorly, it's actually a word, exteriorly. It's useful, but I looked it up to make sure that I know, it is. That's good to know that the word's there if you need it. Altered, restored, or reconstructed, it needs the approval of the ARB, and specifies that the requirement doesn't apply to interior demolitions that don't affect the exterior appearance of the local landmarks. If you have a house designated local landmark and you want to, change the bedrooms, is anything inside,
Interior.
as long as it doesn't affect the outside. Interiorly, right. And then also it specifies that nothing in this law would prevent the ordinary maintenance and repair of any exterior architectural feature of a local landmark if it doesn't involve a change in design, building material, or outward appearance. There's provisions for penalties for offenses, which I'm sure won't happen.
I think in my layman's summary of it, which is much shorter, is exteriorly, if there is a historic structure outside of the historic district, and either the resident wants to raise their hand themselves or someone else wants to say, hey, I think that's historically significant, we will go to the owner of that property and say, hey, either thank you for submitting yourself, or someone thinks this is historically significant, would you like to be listed? And if they say yes, then we start the process. If they don't, then nothing happens. To me, that's a key, because we don't want to be imposing. I mean, there's basically, you can't demolish it, is the biggest kind of law on the books. But potentially, I think we're looking more to add incentives for people to want to do this, rather than really adding restrictions on what they can do with it. I think that it's an easy way for people who want to participate in this to allow them to do it. Not just have yes, they'll immediately get the kind of feel-good benefit of having a historically significant house, but we hope that we'll also have some incentives potentially in the future for them as well.
And just to clarify, which doesn't contradict anything you said, it might not be an entire property. It might be a small building on a piece of property, or it could be, some kind of a marker. Right now, I think the two Benjamin Franklin markers are already protected for different reasons, but let's say there was a similar marker on somebody's property.
Yep. Is there anyone else on the board?
Yeah, I just had one question. When we had first discussed this, we had talked about you know, building, features, object, whatever, and it also got into this discussion about whether or not that included basically non-typical construction. I mean, one might think of, you know, looking at an entire site, an alley of trees in a driveway, or a garden, a planted garden like Untermeyer or something like that, where there are sections that are constructed, obviously, in terms of buildings, but there's whole sections that might be basically just organized planting more than anything. So
Right,
is
and
that
that-
stuff covered?
That would be a site.
That would be a
I would
site.
say that would be a site. And then that's why,
I just
yeah.
wasn't sure if that was in or out.
but, well, that's why, yeah, it's in. It wasn't in, but it's in. And that's also why the ARB chapter, the amendment that I referred to earlier is in there, because right now the if something like that may not require site plan approval or a building permit,
Right.
but you want the ARB to look at it anyway. And so that's why it says that the ARB has the authority. Right now, the ARB has only the authority to review applications for building permits and site plan approval. Don't we have that? You know what, Brian? There was one thing I should have said. One, it's a tiny little, it's a correction that I would make to the definition of demolition. Demolish in the definition section. Right now it says pull down, raise, destroy, remove, or relocate all any portion of the exterior of the building or structure. It also should say structure, comma, mark, or object or site. And it's just perfectly consistent with the rest of the law. And in fact, the word demolish is never used without referring to all of them. And I would just clarify and put it in there so we don't have to, I just noticed it this afternoon, so we don't have to do the local law in another 5 weeks. So if you were, you know, going to pass it tonight, I would just insert that phrase.
Anyone else? Should we open up to the public?
Yeah, look, I'm happy to hear it.
Pat, we have your letter. I don't know if you'd rather.
I can read it, or brief.
Yeah.
Dear Mayor Smith and members of the Village Board of Trustees, the Irvington Historical Society is committed to the preservation of the historic integrity of the village, and we applaud the many successful efforts that the Village Board has undertaken to ensure this goal. We believe that the local landmarks law presently under consideration will enhance that legacy. We also realize the importance of a number of buildings and sites in the village that are integral to the history and aesthetic of Irvington. The intent of this law is to protect these historically significant properties that contribute to our architectural and cultural heritage. The proposed law is the result of extensive efforts by the village administration, local residents, and members of the Historic District Committee. It authorizes the Board of Trustees to designate such sites as local landmarks and sets forth a very thoughtful and detailed process to be followed in doing so. It is clear that very careful consideration has been given to the rights of property owners, and there will be no designation of a property as a local landmark without consent of the owners. The members of the Irvington Historical Society Board of Trustees are supportive of the passage and implementation of the local landmarks law and believe that it will provide significant benefits to both property owners and village residents as a whole. As always, we thank you for your continued efforts at historic preservation.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public who would like to speak? Well, you're all kind of quasi-public, you all have rules.
Quasi. Exteriorly.
Exteriorly.
Interiorly.
Yes, good evening, Paul Ficalora. I am the chairman of the Irvington Landmark Preservation, Inc., which was formed in 1994, a 501c3. Just to give you a little idea of what our mission is to identify, preserve, and document historic landmarks and sites in the village of Irvington, and with the sanction of village officials and/or private residents, publicly identify those sites and landmarks with appropriate plaques or markers, which we've done. We've done that for the tea house at Halsey Pond. We've done that for the library building. The little plaque by Washington, the sculpture of Rip Van Winkle. Certainly, there's a marker by the Washington Irving Monument, and Town Hall. We're waiting for that to, there's a great plaque to be installed there.
It's up in the lobby right
Yeah.
now, but it will
Very
be,
heavy.
it will be.
It's very heavy.
Very
It's very heavy. It's very
Oh,
heavy.
the big Vicar House too.
And Big Vicar House. And we have in the works the mile markers that were mentioned. We have spoken to the owner of the properties. I've sent to the village the documents of what should go on that, so we're looking forward to that. And there's talk in our committee of actually having plaques or documents for some of the streets on Main Street, because they're historic in terms of Astor and Buckout and what have you, and that would be additional initiatives that we have, as well as other sites that come to our attention. With that said, I have to be honest with you, I was quite surprised to learn about this only from the public email that was sent from the village. So I was never part of any of this discussion whatsoever. It's a bit surprising. But I did read it all, and I think the criteria in there seems pretty reasonable. I'm not an expert on the criteria, so I don't know whether it's too much or too little, but it seems somewhat reasonable on there. On the procedure part of it, there's a lot of work for the mayor and the board of trustees and the architectural review board. You have to read the request. You've got to send out the request for designation. The property owner with consent, they have to schedule a public hearing, so now you've got to run a public hearing. You can get expert testimony, I realize that. And the board of trustees decides. Which is a pretty, when you think about it, you're making a lifetime decision. That's pretty profound when you think about the long-term decision-making. Now, the Washington Irving Monument is on the National Historic Registry. And that was one of my jobs when I first got on the committee, is to get that accomplished. And I did. And in order to get that accomplished, the process was lengthy and detailed, and I had to hire a writer who specialized in making these presentations for me. And so they did all the history, and for anyone who doesn't realize it, that's on the Historic Register because of, not because of Washington Irving, and because of the architect Daniel Chester Friend. And on the National Historic Register, you've got historians, and you've got scholars, and you've got all these specialists and experts who will evaluate this report and then make a decision. And I believe the state has the same process as well. So it's interesting to me that you're putting yourselves, the Board of Trustees and the Architecture Review Board, in the position of making these decisions. And with all due respect, I'm not sure we have historians and scholars and all of that on there to really weigh in on these lifetime decisions. You had mentioned earlier, Brian, about possible incentives down the road. Well, the state will give you tax incentives, and I'm sure if a homeowner, other than a site or a mile mark or whatever a homeowner would like to have done, there's going to want tax incentives. So I'm thinking, well, what if the Trent building, it's a Stanford White building, it certainly could probably fall in that criteria, and they want a tax incentive. Are we prepared to give them a tax incentive? That's a pretty big chunk out of our revenue. So I would have concerns about incentives that you would give property owners, homeowners, for that. So just in reviewing, in case you haven't figured out, I don't think this is necessary, because I think the Irvington Landmark Preservation Committee does a very good job of doing that. We'd be happy to review with the Historical Society if there's any need for attention to any particular sites. But I do have a real concern about down the road. And the concern is, it says here clearly that the property owner has the right to make the decision no. But if you go 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, whenever, And some buildings, some owner says no, and it's a really historic building, and they do something to it, and it's terrible. And all of a sudden, someone from the Landmarks Preservation Committee comes up and says, Mr. Mayor, we have to put more teeth in this. We can't let the homeowners decide, we have to decide. And all of a sudden, that changes.
Couldn't they do that anyway? Like, couldn't they just start this from scratch? Yeah, it's like, if that was, I mean, I think when we look at the Yale house, it was a great example. That was going to potentially be torn down. So we came up with a quick law, and that's basically the only teeth we have is the anti-demolition. So I think that in that, the 50-year down the road, I think someone could propose a much tougher or much more stringent law than this. I mean, to us, I think that the board almost unanimously thought that the homeowner had to be on board. And I think that, I think the thing we really want to try to protect is the demolition piece of it. That's the biggest thing for us, for the, half a dozen or so places you can think of off the top of your head that are outside the historic district and aren't on the National Register that you probably want preserved. Demolition is the biggest thing. I think then the second question is, why would anyone raise their hand and have any kind of restrictions, which demolition is, restricted from demolishing it. That's why we think we want things like incentives. And I think, if I think of a perfect a case for something like that, I think of the castle on Strawberry Hill, for lack of a better term, where it's a 10,000 square foot house on an acre, but it's kind of been whacked up so many times that it's not quite an albatross, but it's definitely undervalued and it needs a ton of work. So to have someone come in and maintain that, which I don't think a lot of people even know it's there, to be honest. But if you drive on Circle Drive, you're not letting people drive on Strawberry Lane. It's a really cool building. It's one of the coolest buildings in town. And I would love to think of a way monetarily to incentivize someone like that. Well, what could that be? Maybe, through some kind of special permitting process, you allow people that have a historically designated house, they can have a multifamily use, so that instead of having a 10,000 square foot single family, they can, have 3 units in there, whatever. I'm making it up as I go. But those are the kind of incentives I'm looking for. I don't think tax incentives. I mean, the tax incentives you're referring to are typically when you do renovations and things like that. You get a credit for it. I don't ever see it as saying that if you're a historic house that you get 10% off your property value or something like that. I mean, in 50 years, someone could have a very different opinion than me, but I definitely take your point.
I haven't gone to many meetings, but I've been to a variety of planning board meetings. And there was a time when 7 Astor Street came up, which is the train station there. And it's interesting because the planning board really has already, and I think this village already has in its veins, the interest to preserve the integrity of sites that we consider very valuable. And so it's already there. I mean, the architect owner wanted to butcher the roof, and the planning board refused. They said, come back to us with something that fits in with that design, and thanks to Earl, who did a little history on that, to make it look reasonable, which he wouldn't do. So it's already in here as part of the village. So, and I think that's really important. I think that's where you have your controls already.
But I think you can use your argument in 5 years or 10 years if you had a very progressive, planning board that said, what, put a whole new roof on top of there. Like, I think that's, we actually talked about that specific issue quite a bit and how to kind of codify that as well. And I think, again, we're trying to balance the whole property owner with historic preservation thing all the time. It's always a balancing act that we find ourselves up against, and I think that's why demolition, broadly defined, would also cover some of that, destroying the roof, historic roof. So I think that little law that we kind of put in under duress almost has bought us some time. And I think we see some of this as the natural progression from there, that, if you want to, I think if you, let's just say that something gets historically designated, if you're buying that, that going in. To me, that's why to me, I don't like the idea, and obviously it happened in the historic district almost wholesale, or for contributing houses, that you've lived there for 50 years and now it's a historic house, and now there are potential restrictions. This, at least someone raised their hand, and then if they raised their hand and you buy it, you were aware that it was already done. So I think I like that. I think that's something that, I think I'm very happy with this law. And I think having that control was key for me to really support this, is that the initial step was within the property owner's, purview completely.
And I understand that, and I think that's fine, and certainly a plaque can do the same thing, you know, without having a law. So, look,
A plaque is nice, but you can put a plaque on my house. It doesn't really, you know, it doesn't have any, there's no teeth. But there's no teeth to a plaque, though, that's what I'm saying. Like, it might say, hey, this is a great historic house. I can't wait to knock it down, but I'm gonna keep the plaque. You know, it's,
Right, yeah.
All right.
Make sure you say, yeah, so I think that's why I think you can't, the plaque without any law is nice. It's not a protective value, other than, you know.
Right. Well, look, obviously, this is the direction you want to go, so the only thing I would leave you with is if there is, I understand you might have other laws that would come to supersede it, but if you could incorporate it here, the fact that that clause, I think is number 7, can never, ever be changed, then that would be very valuable, because I think that the property owner's rights far exceeds the rights of any government. Thank you very much, Susan.
I would agree with you, but I don't think we'd ever say nothing can ever change.
Well, if it puts in there, it would be more of a hurdle for someone to overrule.
If we can change the Bill of Rights, I don't think we can do it now, but we could. But I understand your sentiment. Any other public comment? John Malone obviously didn't like our comments.
Antarani apologizes.
Mr. Mayor?
Sure.
I just wanted to mention that, thank you, Paul. He'd be a good partner in this whole process. The Irvington Landmarks Preservation, Inc., on which I serve as a board member, we can continue recognizing properties and putting up plaques, and anyone can make a nomination of a property or a site, and it's the board that ultimately approves the designation of the sites that are nominated. So it doesn't really change the operation and the benefit that the Irvington Landmark Preservation, Inc. has to the village. And just one quick comment on Paul's point about the Trent Building and tax incentives. The Trent Building is in the mapped historic district, and that's one thing. And so, you know, insofar as the demolition and ARB review is concerned, that is already in place. But incentives also are already available on the state and national level. I think there's some 20% deduction that you can make based on costs, improvement costs of any alterations to a building.
Commercial
So it has
property, yeah.
commercial properties, and it has certain criteria that it has to meet. Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Do you require the property owner's permission before you put the plaque?
So it was a question to Paul?
Yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yeah, okay, so you can decide something.
Paul doesn't
is-
run on it.
Right.
Yes or no? That's the first thing we do, is we inform them, like in the mile marker as an example, it's in front of the former fee building, and so we went to the present owner of that, and we said, here it is. We met with him, we'd like to put a plaque designating this here, and he said, absolutely, and, so, yeah.
Has anybody ever said no?
I don't think there are any private houses.
No, we haven't done any private.
Oh, okay.
Right there,
Okay.
the monument
Okay.
on Broadway and, yeah, right.
Yeah, the tea house,
Most of it's been village-owned
Right.
property.
So we always say
Yeah, we say yes.
thank you.
I think one other comment I'll make is I think that the houses that I envision people raising their hand or someone saying, hey, you should raise your hand, are going to be pretty obvious. You know, I don't think we're going to be debating a, 1941, house that was historic because of some, esoteric reason. I think these are going to be obvious ones that are, that probably didn't rise to the national level, but it certainly is something that we're going to look at and go, yeah, that's historic, without much architectural background or historic background even. That's my blank view. I don't anticipate having 300 of these. It's going to be a handful of ones that I think you could poll anyone and say, do you think this is a historic house? And they'd say yes. So,
Just what's historic now is going to be different in 25 years. They
absolutely.
would know the fire department, firehouse is going to be historic in 25 years.
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you read the article about the Frank Lloyd Wright building in Montana. Was it Montana, I think? That was, they were trying to preserve it and they couldn't get the money together for it. And in the middle of the night, the owner went out with, had the deconstruction crew hit it. And it's no longer extant. So I think the demolition provisions are quite good. I was going to only correct one little bit of history because I think that the real alarm about protecting historic properties came before the Yellow House. I think it happened with Fufi's. Or
It started
had
there.
with Fufi's.
Started there.
When there were no tools to really protect the what was happening
I
there.
do think that one was more of a debate than the other house, though. Because I remember having looked through it and had saw what it looked like inside. I did not think it was historic when the outside had been so changed and the inside was a disaster. But that's a debate we never had to have because we didn't have any protections in place. But I did think that started the ball rolling.
That's what my only point was.
Yeah.
Not anything about the architecture per se, but that's what really got.
It did. It started the discussion for sure. It definitely accelerated it when the Yellow House was under potential under plan for demolition.
I would only add that I'm very pleased and happy with the way the law is written now. I'm happy, as Brian said, that the homeowner does get both immediate and afterwards, options on saying yes or no. I do think it's important that we as a board determine what incentives are going to be available, because once this law is passed, I envision that part of the information packet that the owner would get right off the bat would include reasons why they shouldn't say no right from the start. And I think that the law, as written now, doesn't give a whole lot of reasons for the homeowner to say yes. So I think we sort of need to work on this and get this done separate from passing.
I mean, we have one example of some benefits for historic building preservation that I can recall right now, which is in the multifamily zone. It's written such that historical buildings designated as historical, if they are maintained and not removed, can give you some coverage benefits as a developer, which is different than tax benefits, obviously.
And also, it was made a requirement on the development of the fee property. One of the conditions of the board approving the whole thing was that they preserve the mile marker, so that you can sometimes get the incentive when somebody's asking something from the board.
Well, I'll just make a quick comment that I appreciate all Paul's efforts, and I think that, his group is a valuable partner in this, and as is the Historical Society, and I'm certainly glad that, that back to the 2003 comprehensive plan that first talked about this, I think it's been lots of important steps in a community like this that we keep hearing that it's very, very important to the people who live here that the historic character, the uniqueness of Irvington is passed down to the next generations. And I also appreciate all the work that has gone on from the Historic District Committee, as well as the folks who were part of the Comprehensive Plan Working Group. And that was a whole nother group of citizens who just, heard the message and put their hand up and said, this is something I want to chime in on. So I'm glad that we're looking at this, and I certainly support it.
And well, I had thought the local landmarks committee had gotten a copy of it, so I apologize. I had to learn about it from the email. Anyone else with comments? You guys, I think we're probably ready to vote, right?
Okay.
I don't think the change we made is very big, and I think
it's something that really starts the process more than closes too much, I think, so. Resolve to adopt a local law amending village code to add a chapter designating.
You want to close the public hearing
yeah,
first? I'm sorry.
that's a good idea.
Technicality.
I'll make a motion to close the public hearing. Have a second?
Second.
All in favor? I still want to vote. Resolve to adopt a local law amending village code to add a chapter designating protecting local landmarks. Someone like to make a motion?
So moved.
A second? All in favor? Sorry, I have to do that one, kind of.
Mary, I sent the revised.
That little
Great.
line.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Ann, for your attention to detail on this.
Thanks for everyone to work on this.
So Earl, are you here to make a designation now that you're working?
I have a whole list of them.
Right now.
And the Historical Society for years, some 40 years, I think, have also been advocating the very thing that this board has passed.
I think we found a nice balance.
Yeah.
Thank you very
Thank you,
much.
guys.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Thanks for your support.
Thanks, Paul. Next up is the appointment of a volunteer firefighter. Nice to see a new firefighter. Resolved to approve the following new probationary member of the Irvington Fire Company, Sebastian Tenusen. How to say that? But he's not here. I'll make a motion. Can I have a second?
Second.
All in
Oh,
favor?
Sebastian. Oh, I know.
Aye.
I didn't know his last name, sorry.
I think Connie's excited it is an aye.
Well, it's right behind me, you know, it's the street behind me. Anyway, sorry.
So was that,
So,
was
yes.
that a yes? Was that I know him, yes?
That was yes.
No.
Yes. Sorry.
Next is a resolution to support an immediate state agency rulemaker for tanker avoidance zones. This is a long resolution.
Well, you got a lot of whereases. Brenda will read it.
I think this is, just kind of furthering our commitment to do the right thing on the Hudson River. So some of that is, yeah, exactly. Thank you, Larry. Yeah. So I'll skip to the end.
And our concern that perhaps we're not being heard at some of the information meetings which have happened.
Right, exactly right. That's a good point.
I guess we heard that there were some Rivertown representation, but it wasn't strong enough is the question.
Well, their reports wasn't very strong.
Yes, exactly.
That most of the testimony was coming from.
I'm sorry, I can't hear you, Larry.
That most of the testimony at these hearings were coming from the industry and not much
Oh, okay.
from local communities.
Yeah, I did hear that.
But we want to be sure to give the proper support to the state, to the governor of the state, so
Correct.
that they can actually, put some teeth into their, the law that was passed that or being considered to give them greater oversight on the waterways within the state, more than just letting the feds usurp all the control. So, seems like a good thing.
Yeah. Resolved that the Village of Irvington requests that DEC Commissioner Sagos immediately advance a rulemaking process to establish tanker avoidance zones for petroleum-bearing vessels, implementing the strongest possible regulations allowed under the law, and further resolved that the Village Administrator of the Village of Irvington be hereby authorized and directed to send a copy of this resolution to the Honorable Andrew M. Cuomo, Governor of the State of New York, the Honorable Basil Sagos, Commissioner of the DEC, Honorable Andrew Stewart Cousins, the Honorable Thomas J. Abenanti, and to such other persons as the village administrator, in his discretion, may deem proper in order to effectuate the purpose of this resolution. I'll make a motion. Can I have a second? Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Go for
I
it,
think
Larry.
it might
Yes.
be, Larry, I think it might be valuable to send this on to any of the other local villages that
Yeah.
may be considering this and haven't done it.
In your discretion.
Right.
Right, it's just a suggestion.
I'll take it under advisement.
And also, thank you for pulling it all together.
Yes, thanks.
Yes.
And we actually had planned, I just mentioned we planned to pass this at our last meeting, that was canceled for Snell, I believe, so.
It's quite a bit to wade through or sail through.
Yeah.
Reports of boards, standing committees, and officers. Trustee liaison.
I don't have too much tonight, except to say that I wanted to congratulate Larry and the village for getting the grant, the $90,000 grant for the
We're allowed to talk about it?
Tree wells on Main Street, yeah, I think it's a done deal, and the money came from what the fund set aside for villages affected by the bridge, was that it?
Community Benefits Program.
As long as we don't have to call the bridge the Cuomo Bridge as part of the grant process, but anyways, and it's gonna be, a number, it won't be all of Main Street for sure, but it'll be a few blocks of Main Street, so I think that's great.
I think too, the nice thing is that, we have some money to figure out exactly what works well and what looks good and all that kind of stuff.
Have you seen what was
Yes.
installed? So
Yes.
what are the two locations again, in front of Tra-La-La? Is that one of them, or do I
In
forget?
front of Tra-La-La
Or
or
the
whatever
old
is
Tra-La-La,
there,
yeah.
and in front of Squint.
Yeah.
Those are the two.
So go take a look at them and see, they look pretty nice.
Yeah, so,
They do look nice.
Anyways, that was it for now.
perfect, thank you.
Yeah, very classy.
Doc, I'm guessing you have a nice write-up from Joe?
Actually, Joe's quote was a short one.
40
Oh,
minutes.
except that's not it.
Okay.
Hold on one second. That's the agenda from last night's RPAC meeting. That was not a short one.
He said you'd have plenty to pick from.
The IS Executive Board is meeting Tuesday, January 23rd at the Senior Center. The Irvington Woods Committee is meeting as we speak. And tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. in the Senior Center, the Irvington seniors are going to be recognizing 2 police officers who have done wonderful jobs of outreach with the seniors. Both Ed Vise and Dave Walsh are going to be recognized, and it's well deserved. That's it.
Thank you. That was short, thanks, Joe.
Okay, Greg Nilsson. I usually have it printed out here, but tap to download. Sorry. This would be the report from Greg Nilsson, the Highway Department activities, winter storms. Okay, should we go 12:20? No, we don't need to go. On 12:25, there was 12:30, there was a storm, that is December 25th, December 30th, then the 4th, the 8th, and the 17th. Sorry.
You want me to go? Okay. Sorry, I have nothing to report. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. Actually, both relate to, I have very little to report, but both relate to the library. Tonight, I had the pleasure of sitting in on the meeting where the new, the Representative Workforce Housing Group, which is the new owner of the condominium part of the library, presented to the residents what their plans are. It was very well done, very well received, and it looks like this is
As good as we hoped?
better.
Okay, good.
And Larry and I are going to meet with library staff and him. We were planning on doing that. We got snowed up, so we're going to follow up on that.
That's what this was all about.
Also, the Irvington Historical Society lecture, Adventures in the Neutral Ground, Irvington and Phillips Manor in the Revolutionary War. Our own Dr. Eric Weisselberg on Sunday, January 21st from 2 to 4 p.m. at the library. If any of you were at the Veterans Day celebration, he spoke briefly there about what the role, it was all news to me, about what happened here during the Revolutionary War and how significant local involvement was. So again, this Sunday, 2 to 4 p.m. at the library.
All right. And he's a high school.
He's one of our high school social studies teachers.
Right. So what got me all choked up was all the snowstorms that Greg was reporting on. But, so they obviously took care of all those. And there's the recycling of the Christmas trees is still, oh no. Going.
She doesn't like when Christmas is over.
I'm so sorry.
You want me to read it?
Yeah. Finish that. And
All
then,
right.
then there is one from, and then there's the theater.
Repair damaged drainage problems inside the highway garage, clear a clogged pipe, installed precast catch basin and new drainage pipes. And they prepared for heavy rainstorm by clearing off catch basin tops, especially at key locations.
I think that's it.
Okay, sorry. Through it.
Do you want to try it again?
I'll try once more.
Try once more.
This is the theater.
Because this is the theater. You love doing
Right,
this.
I met with the theater. I love doing that. There's something from Jim English being there somewhere
You know,
too.
I got it too. I'll
Okay,
find that one.
okay, you do that. So there's been a series of 2 movies that are movies that have music connections. And the first one apparently got quite a good review. I didn't go to that one, but this one is February 2nd, 2 trains running at 7:30. So it's has live music and question and answers about blues. I mean, what the blues are. A local blues historian, Jim Coppell. So after the screening that involves the blues, you will learn more about the blues. That's at the theater on February 2nd. And then Common Ground has an event on the February 3rd. Birds of Chicago, really interesting group. So there are people, when I went to the theater meeting on Monday night, actually, they said people still walk into the theater who live here and say, I never knew there was a theater here. Not people from Nyack, but people who live in Irvington. So just tell people, that there is a theater here. And there's such an eclectic choices of things, play readings, programs for kids, all kinds of things. So anyway, that's good. And I am going to meet, in my role as downtown chamber business liaison, Nick Campbell will be the new president of the chamber, the local chamber, and he has a establishment right across here. It's Insurance on Hudson, it's called. And he is in discussion about being kind of the prime mover of a spring event, summer event, which I won't say much about yet because I have to finalize things with him and see if it's going to work. But he's also been working with the school on the playground project, which is a fundraising project. So that's the chamber, and I'm sure the farmers market is going along fine. It's the 2nd and 4th Saturdays. Got that right? Okay. All right. So
Water department.
water. Yes, water. Thank you.
In addition to reading water meters and winter maintenance of water department facilities, they also worked on a sewer problem at 15 South Buckhouse
That's why I
Street.
couldn't read that
They
one.
assisted homeowners in remediating the issue. They assisted the fire department to burst pipe in the basement of 9 Dow's Lane, and they shut off the water to the residents. They assisted Joe Clark with a frozen pipe at the Irvington Historical Society, and there was a water main break on Erie Street that they happily repaired.
Ooh, happily, yes.
I added the adjective.
Good. I'm so glad you found that.
Sure. You were done already, right? I didn't know if you were finding more.
You were just...
Getting postcards out already. Village Administrator's Report.
So I have a brief outline of the Station Road Sidewalk Project / Main Street ADA Accessibility Project. I understand that came up at actually the last regular meeting that I wasn't at back in December. But just to give you an overview, so there are 2 federal grants that are in play here. The first of which was the smaller one that I know you probably remember the saga that we were given $120,000 to put properly constructed handicap accessibility ADA compliant ramps on Main Street, sidewalk ramps, curb drops, whatever you want to call them, at the various crossings. If you have noticed, those that walk Main Street a lot know that there are drop curbs going across the side streets with no crosswalk, and then going across Main Street there are crosswalks with no drop curbs. So that's
Not right.
backwards. So that's got to be fixed. So we did put in a grant for that. When the grant was awarded, it was too small for New York State DOT to even work with us on it because we had to meet all the various federal requirements for federal grants. As I've said before, you've heard me say that the requirements for this federal grant, $120,000, are identical to building a highway interchange. I mean, there's no difference in terms of the requirements, just a few zeros missing. But it made the $120,000 to the point where I was ready to recommend that we give it back, that we decline the grant. Shortly after that was received, we had already applied for a federal transportation alternatives grant, which was a much larger amount, so we didn't get into that same predicament, for the construction of a sidewalk along Station Road from roughly where the culvert was replaced up to the tunnel and through the tunnel as well, so some sort of a mechanism to get through the tunnel. In addition, we also had recommended intersection improvements for the Main Street Broadway intersection to improve the signalization that's up there, to improve where the crosswalks fall, and without going into the details, you'll also know that things aren't aligned correctly up there, and the lighting isn't necessarily in the right place. Signalization is not compliant with modern signalization, so there's a few upgrades that need to happen, and we were recommending that that get done. So that's what I just described. The Station Road sidewalk and the Main Street Broadway intersection is one project, and the Main Street ramps are the other. The New York State DOT, after we suggested strongly that they agreed to combine these projects so that we could go out and seek one designer to do all of it in one design report. They have to allocate some of the money behind the scenes, but that doesn't really matter. So it really makes the $120,000 little project actually doable. And so it was kind of fortuitous that we did get the other grant. But that's the full scope of what's happening. As far as the status of it, you know firsthand that you just approved a contract for a design engineer in late December. They are doing their work now. Not much of it is visible. They're doing a lot of behind-the-scenes work. They have some surveying to do. But hopefully in a few months we'll start seeing some semblance of plans for all of these projects combined. I know specifically that Station Road is going to be a concern for some of the people that live adjacent to where the sidewalk is going. I've had conversations with at least one of the residents. The others are aware of it, of course, but it'll be an interactive process with them. They know that. I've committed that to them. But I can't do any of that now because I don't have anything to look at. I haven't, the engineers don't even have a full-blown survey yet of the area. So there's a few steps that have to happen, but over the next few months we'll start to see some product. That's it. But I think we're, from a timing standpoint, if we can get through the design process by the end of this calendar year, I think the target is to try to get out to some sort of construction by the summer of 2019. I think that's if everything goes smoothly, but we'll see. The Station Road sidewalk project will be a very challenging project to build, that's all I'll say. If you know what it was like to do a culvert and closing the road, I can only imagine what it's going to be to be working in that very tight space to put in a sidewalk. It's going to be quite an interesting coordination. So it's going to take some time to figure all that out and make sure it gets done right. But, maybe I'm stating the obvious, but it's not an easy project.
So the Main Street part with the ADA compliant, can they start earlier than the more complicated?
It's going to be bid out as one project for a contractor, so I would say no. And if you don't, my understanding is that the approvals, New York State DOT has to approve all of these designs every step of the way. And it's all being done at the same time, the approval process. That's where we're saving on the time and money.
I'd love to be able to see some combination at Broadway and Harriman Road intersection as well, because that's an atrocious crossing.
Long.
It's not in the scope of these two projects. That doesn't mean it can't be done, but it's not in the scope.
So,
in what way, for pedestrians, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
the Main Street ADA accessibility, refresh me, we've got, every intersection just about has 2 north-south crosswalks and a pair of east-west crosswalks. Now, are we talking about ADA compliance on, will it be on all corners at that point?
I believe it's all corners, yeah.
It's not like we're looking at only one a north-south crosswalk, for instance.
As long as the ones that are there are compliant, they can remain, and in good condition, they can remain. But the ones going across Main Street
That's what I meant.
don't exist. So, so if they don't exist in any location, I don't believe,
No.
right?
Do we have north-south on every street? Because we probably should.
We don't have crosswalks, we don't have two north-south crosswalks at every intersection. There are some intersections that only have one north-south crosswalk.
They all have at least one now.
Yeah, yeah.
They all
You have to have at least
they all
one,
have
yeah.
At least one, yes.
Yes.
And just while I'm thinking about it, the theater district front of Village Hall project, the construction on that would start,
I don't have a final design yet,
okay.
which is, has been a concern of mine. If you read my updates, you'll
Okay,
see the frustration.
okay, let's try to move that forward.
Yep.
Who's doing the design?
Ann Atchison.
Village Clerk Treasurer's Report.
Okay, I'm going to take this opportunity to give you a little overview of the budget, how it stands at the moment, to get some feedback from you as well. If you can just pass these out.
Yeah, it was on the heater.
Hot off the press, man.
Larry and the mayor, feel free to jump in anytime if you'd like to add anything as we're going along. The first page is a timeline of our meetings coming up. All of our department heads have received a package to work on, and I'll be meeting with them shortly to review their submissions. And you can see the schedule for meeting with each department. The next page, I thought we would start the overview with talking about the property tax cap. And I'll share this with Mary Ann. So we're going, it came as a big surprise to us that the village has a very strong tax base growth factor. That's the second line. That was nearly 4%. And additionally, the cap for next year is also at 2%. We haven't seen a 2% cap in many, many years. So the combination of the two, plus a carryover of levy from prior budgets, gives us a total of $889,166 that we could increase our levy and still remain compliant.
Wow.
So that's a huge amount that
Which makes the 2% tax cap completely irrelevant for us this year, in my opinion.
So,
It's because inflation was higher?
well, the 2% was attributed to the inflation rate. And then the growth rate, we're really not sure. The other river towns have also experienced a very strong growth rate.
Greenberg Villages specifically.
Yeah, so we've kind of, we don't
Think it
know,
has to
but
do with
we're
reassessment?
concluding that perhaps it has to do with the revaluation.
So we could basically raise our levy 5% plus and still be under the tax cap.
I don't think we'll do that, given
I think so.
our taxpayers in there.
Brian, are you endorsing that?
No, I'm just saying that once again, the tax cap is completely irrelevant.
Yeah.
Feel good for the governor and piece of legislation.
And then there's you can't deduct your
Another piece of,
taxes.
I guess, good news. Let's turn the page. And what we're going to talk about this week is the assessed valuation. All right. I made them slightly bold. We'll talk about the last three columns. And what we're showing here is that the assessed valuation has also increased significantly. It's mostly attributed to the phase-in exemption that was given to residents. Well, now it's being slowly phased out by 30% each year. So as it gets phased out, we see an increase in assessed valuation. The exemption goes away, now assessables go up. On those last three columns, if you look at the top, I have the word flat, the next one at cap max, and then I have a dollar amount for the last column. And what I'm portraying here is just given the assessed valuation, if we had a flat budget and no changes, we would see a decrease in the levy, right, of the tax rate by 2.72%. So that's the impact of the increased valuation on the tax rate. If we went to the max tax cap provision of over 800,000, that would yield a 6.11% tax
It could
increase.
be all of our last budgets.
So as they say, usually things are somewhere in the middle.
Might be Gary's
What
last
I,
budget.
what I did on the last column is, you can see here, that would be a 2% increase. So just taking a little bit of, just some guidance that in the past.
As I always said, inflation should be our guide, so.
So this is just, talking points. And if we came in at about a 2% tax rate increase, that would be an increase of the levy of 693,000.
Do the department heads know this information?
What we told them is, we always do a zero-based budget, meaning you just give us your needs, we're always looking for efficiencies. However,
I do now.
they do now. However, if you have needs in your department, this would be the year to express them for consideration.
Doesn't mean we approve them, and I think, just the fact that, I actually, for some reason, I was overly concerned that it was gonna be a very difficult
Yeah,
budget year,
right.
Especially because of the health increases and things like that. So I don't want us to get complacent because the tax cap is not pressure on us, so there's gonna be a lot of internal pressure, I think. And it's not that I don't want them to come forward and say, really, we've had this issue for years, and the fact that, we need an extra $32,000 in our apartment. But, at the same time, I don't want us just to, celebrate early and say, I think we want to have the same discipline we've had every year, and not have any unnecessary costs. I think the one thing we have to understand is the carry forward piece and what that really means for future budgets. But, absent that, seeing a negative 2.72% feels great, but, that's probably unrealistic, but, obviously so is a 6% increase. So as you said, if we're somewhere in the middle, closer to flat, up slightly, it's great.
Especially because we all sent out, a very heartfelt
Yeah.
email to the residents saying that with the inability to deduct salt, we were going to be extremely
Yes.
mindful about expenditures. So this is really good news, but, a lot of individuals are really still reeling from very bad news.
If your assessed value of your home went up, then you're paying a bigger chunk. So-
Then your tax
Yeah.
would go, but
Yeah.
those people losing their exemptions.
And that also, so that's why even at that minus number, for somebody else, it's not minus for them compared to the year
Well,
before.
it depends
It could
on-
be way
Depends on,
greater.
as everything
Where they-
goes,
where they
depends-
fell.
It's all relative. If
Yes,
yours-
exactly.
Yours should go up 10%, if
Yeah.
mine went up 30%.
Exactly.
You paying less, I'm paying more, so it's.
Yeah, I know, it's just,
Very
it's
complicated, yes.
but we know there are people out there who are in a very precarious position, and I
Yes.
think we're all saying the same thing, that we are very sensitive to that issue.
Well, I just say, I'd like to just put my oar in and say that I think this is the one year it looks like we have an opportunity to stay as flat as possible. And I think that we actually, if we can do it, I think it would be a good signal to our residents that we're actually, doing what we can do to try to help mitigate the impact of the reassessment, et cetera, and the salt loss and whatever.
Or maybe there'll be some solution to this.
Well, let's look at one more page, that's the
Yeah.
last page here. What I've done here is I've gone through some of our fixed costs based on, contract obligations, potential increases for non-union. This is also the fifth year, this is the fifth budget that we do not have a police contract. So it gets very difficult because it's more uncertainty. You've, kind of we made some projections, but it's still 5 years of uncertainty.
Wow.
The biggest increase, and it is, quite startling, it's our medical insurance. The budget for medical insurance last year is a little over $2 million for the village. So we've been experiencing increases of about 9% per year. So just a rough math of, nearly 10% of $2 million is $200,000. So if we only had the cap and not the growth factor, we'd be in already a difficult position.
Right.
So
Excuse me.
medical costs are quite significant. Right now, a family plan is about $28,000 a year. Our employees are contributing, it's helping to offset, newer employees are just helping. But it's still a surprise to see a $200,000 increase.
That's every year too. It's not like, oh, they figured it out this year. We expect it next year as well. It's disheartening.
Yeah, new debt service will attribute about $100,000 additional to our budget next year. We're proposing some new, we've kind of factored into our capital plan, a paving budget. We have here $30,000 for the first year, but in a way that it's recurring and that we wouldn't need to keep borrowing for it in the future, because we always are replacing, improving our roads. A good area, which is for the first time I'm able to report that the retirement contribution is relatively flat this year. That's a combination of the rate going down slightly, and I guess being offset by the salaries going up, so it's relatively flat. So in other words, and then my bottom line here, this is, I haven't put insurance in, and there's some other areas that we haven't gotten full information. I don't have any departmental information, but coming out of the gate, these costs add up to $475,000.
So my two-line summary is that we don't have to panic around a bad position, but we have the opportunity to have, I think, a budget that is, as always, sustainable, responsive to the residents' needs, as well as fiscally responsible as well. So I think we're in shape for it. It's shaping up to be a decent budget year, and give you a very good budget.
Do we know if there's any
you're on the right
rebate?
track.
Do we know if there's any rebate back from the state for staying under the cap anymore, or that's over?
That's finished.
Well, we didn't get
I
that
think
little
it's tied
back
with
in.
the school, it's tied in something with the school, but not for the.
Yeah, I think the school is the last one, and they're in the last year.
Well, we don't know,
Which part is-
we don't necessarily know if every one of you have received what you're supposed to receive. The information on that's pretty unclear to us. We've complied all along with all the requirements to enable those rebates to be triggered, but the timing of the rebates is kind of mysterious, yeah.
Took me over a year to get the first one.
Yeah.
November last year, I mean, last year.
Yeah,
It's kind of it's kind of,
Then it was the one that was the savings, the cap was finished and it was the,
then the savings
Yeah.
plan, which we did, we complied, all I can say is the village has complied with everything that we needed to comply with to
This
enable
is very
those
useful,
rebates.
Brenda, this is,
so
Good
it's
check.
an overview, so that when we look at each department's request, we can put it in context of how much we're looking for.
I do have one question that is not about this, but about the dates.
Sure.
February 15th?
Well,
there was,
I know, but the village calendar currently is still showing it as the 14th.
Yeah,
It's going to be updated?
I talked quickly with the mayor on that. And it's worthwhile to ask the question. The 14th is obviously not a holiday for most, but I circulated the information about the upcoming meetings to the Comprehensive Plan Committee, and Rick Rizzullo did mention that he it's also Ash Wednesday, so.
It's worse than
Unfortunate confluence with that.
Yeah, so it may be the
said it
path of
could
least
change.
resistance to move it to the 15th, and then we'll do all this, we'll mix and match all of this on the 15th instead of the 14th, if people are available.
I have the February 22nd meeting. I'm actually going to be away. That's this school holiday week. Just thinking maybe the police, theater, building department, maybe we could somehow figure out a way to have them around. Maybe not have a budget hearing that, or to have them in that night. It might make it too complicated. We can't do that, but maybe
Well, we'll look at it.
yeah.
Okay.
Or maybe we move the fire department that night, which is typically a less complicated budget, or something. So we can talk about that offline, but I just wanted to highlight that I won't be here that night.
so you want to change the 14th to the 15th?
To the 15th, yeah. If
February 15th instead of 14th.
Here I am thinking I got an off center.
That was also a CPC meeting, so it would
With the
just get moved over as
hearings,
well?
Or with the workshops, yeah.
I guess, yeah.
Right, so then,
So the 14th was also on the list of the CPC meeting, so would that be
Yes.
moved over as well?
Yes,
Okay, so now I'm erasing the 14th and putting it on the 15th?
yes, I'll update all of this.
Okay, right.
but Yes,
Yes.
then we would eliminate the February 22nd budget and then
and we'll figure
move
out,
them around. Okay.
yeah.
So,
I mean,
so
you might be able to-
eliminating the meeting itself?
No, no,
no, I
Oh,
don't think so.
no,
So
okay,
that's a part.
okay.
So that's
I just
two
like to-
Thursdays.
I just want to be there for the police and theater and building departments, if we can figure out a way to make it work.
Maybe you'll
Okay,
come back and give me a vacation.
There you go.
Your idea of sense is to swap them with
Yeah, with the
the
lesser.
fire and sewer.
Yeah, because the fire department, the water department typically don't have a lot of things in their budget that they're, I mean, I think the fire department's been the same for 10 years or so.
Right.
Well, they'll need to be prepared. It's only a week away.
True.
Okay. So maybe we could move the police up to February 5th?
If they're ready, yeah.
Yeah,
We'll work.
we'll look at it, yeah.
Is that everything, Brenda?
That's it for me.
Mary, before you start, I actually looked up the movie, the documentary you were talking about, it's called The Wolf Pack. Anything else?
Special recommendation.
Yeah, exactly.
I can cross it off my list.
Do you have anything else?
This is movie reviews by our village
Yeah, any
attorney.
other movie recommendations?
And we want to village attorney movie review.
Yeah, exactly.
Movie
Two
moment.
thumbs up. I assume there's no public comment. Review action items?
Other than changing these meetings around, no, I mean, we have follow-up on the noise complaint, obviously, and the law and all that, so that's, I guess, would be considered an action item.
Yep, sounds good. And I will make a meeting to adjourn. I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?